I think that's fair. I think it's fair to say, yes, there's always going to be room for discussion on something, and even though it's inconvenient, like it doesn't appeal to the inner ethos of a pastor. Like, pastors love to have, this is the answer, and that's what it is. In my time of pastoring, and even before I got to pastoring, that was something that I heard a lot, was that pastors just like having answers. And I relate to that. If I have a member come up to me and says, like, hey, what do I do with this passage? It's kind of nice to have the convenience of saying, here's what you do with that, here's what it is. Next question, please.
Yeah, exactly. It's not always that easy, though.
And now that I mentioned that, it kind of makes me wonder. I wonder how much of that comes from old evangelistic habits that the Adventist Church has developed. Because I don't know if you've ever been to a traditional Adventist evangelistic series or seen tapes of one, but basically at the beginning of each new series, each new night in this 28-part series, they have a section where it's Bible questions from the previous presentation, basically, and the preacher will stand up there and the elder or the pastor will read the questions that came in, and that he'll answer them on the spot, and I think for their time period there was a lot of ethos ethos power to just being able to off the cuff say, this is what the answer to this Bible question is. I think
made them look more authoritative.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it made him seem more credible, or just, I don't know. I mean, yeah, of course, the audience is going to trust the speaker more if he can act like he knows what he's talking about and he can instantly answer it. But at the same time, I guess we should approach some things with, like, well, maybe if something comes up or other evidence comes out, maybe we should leave that on the back burner, Yeah, but I think I agree that we do need to draw the line on some things, or maybe try to bring things to a conclusion.
Yeah, and I think that it's more out of necessity than out of like it's not because we can certainly say things are case closed, but because you have to have some sort of tolerances for what needs to be discussed over and over again and what doesn't need to be discussed. Like, can you imagine if scientists had to sit down and each time have a session where they're like, okay, but like, what is reality? Before we could do any experiments, what is reality? Like, that would get tiring. That would get boring really, really fast.
It would. It would.
So most religions and most philosophies tend to settle on, like, okay, here's the assumptions that we take for granted, and everything we're going to talk about is based on these assumptions.
But hardly anyone kind of stops to question those assumptions. Yeah. Which is usually, they're usually quite fair, but I don't know. I'd say what we have discovered.
Right. So this is the issue of what in theology they call hermeneutics, which is, how do we know that we know things in the Bible? How do we know that those things mean what they say literally, or if not literally, how? Something that I think is surprising to most people when I bring it up is that the Seventh-day Adventist Church, since the beginning, we don't have a unified way. Like, we don't actually have a set of assumptions that we have about the Bible, that we say, this is what we think is like things that you and I agree on about the Bible. We don't have anything like that. So it makes issues like women's ordination, like gays and lesbians and the LGBT plus community, and how we deal with them, and all of those things based on what the Bible says or doesn't say about them. It really gets muddy because, well, I can say whatever I want. Muddy. Because it fits with the way that I'm interpreting the Bible. And you say it doesn't matter anything to me because, well, it's not how I'm reading the Bible. So it's really, I don't know, just super weird that we're such a part of Adventist culture and heritage revolves around this idea that we like to be right.
Yeah.
But
I feel like that's almost human nature too.
Oh, for sure. But like, the Adventist Church made a religion out of it, man.
Yeah.
I was reading some old, like I've been reading a lot of old Adventist literature, and a lot of it revolves around this idea, and a lot of it is still present in like just Christianity in general. But the idea that if you believe this idea, then you're saved. Like if you just believe the idea is true, then you're good to go. Like never mind what effect it has on your life, never mind never mind
if you're taking it to heart.
But if you just like believe that it's intellectually true, right? Like say for example,
believing that Jesus is the Christ, right?
Believing that Jesus was the historical Christ, he was the historical factual event that can be verified historically. You must believe that. Boom. Now you have faith in Jesus, which is kind of a really limited intellectual view of faith.
Yeah, it is quite narrow-minded, I guess, perhaps. Or it's very simplified. Overly simplified.
Because it brings up a lot of issues like, okay, so if I believe that, but I also believe that there are other gods, now what? You know? Well, you also got to believe these other ideas that we believe are facts. You must believe those also. So God basically is just coming to grab people that agree with him, is what it starts to sound like. Like if you agree with my view of reality, then you're saved.
Oh.
See?
Yes. That's how it goes. And I think, okay, and here's what the thing is like, we have a lot of modern problems or a lot of issues that we raise up and discuss. But the thing is, you know, God purposely did not make the Bible 192 books trying to list out every possible scenario and what to do. You know, a lot of it is simplified, and I don't think it's the point for us to get muddied up the rules and laws like maybe the Pharisees did.
Yeah, or at the very least, what some Christians have decided on is like, okay, maybe the policies themselves aren't what's important. Maybe it's the principle behind the policies, and you get into all those things. And usually, when we talk about the queer community or people who are non-heterosexual, then we usually go that route. We're like, well, maybe the policies that are in the Bible aren't about. Maybe what's important about those policies isn't the policy of don't be gay. Maybe there's a principle behind that doesn't necessarily mean don't be gay.
Yeah.
Because if you reduce
I see what you mean.
If you reduce it,
just don't be gay without protection, right?
Yeah, just don't be gay without protection.
Wow.
Yeah, welcome.
Good advice.
Yep. If you're gonna be gay, use protection. If you're gonna be not gay, it's fair play.
No, also use protection.
Oh, okay.
Don't trust it.
On this one. When in doubt, beat it out.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Speaking of which, that's gonna be straight to hell.
Okay, that's a perfect segue. Gabriel and James, I don't know how long you were in here to listen to our first part, but
can I get a TLDR?
Yeah, go ahead with that.
No, I was just gonna say we didn't really dive into it exactly. We were just kind of we were just warming up. We were kind of laying down the groundwork.
So the TLDR to that is there's a problem within Adventism specifically that is kind of unique to Adventism, where we don't have a unified hermeneutic. So the way that we think about the Bible isn't there's no rule anywhere that says this is how we interpret the Bible, which has its pros and its cons. One of those cons is that it creates a complete just crap fest of interpretations where somebody is totally in the right to interpret the Bible one way because that's the rules of interpretation that they've set out for themselves that they're following, but they're not the ones that everybody else is following because there is no one set of rules that everybody's following. So you end up with this really weird paradox where we say that scripture is of no private interpretation, therefore we shouldn't create rules for it. But then what that does is it makes it to where everybody has their own private interpretation, which is bad.
Which breeds conflict, I guess, when you go to one church and they say one thing and you go to a different church and they're saying another thing.
Yeah, like if I head down to Gabe's church and they tell me that it's okay to eat meats that are clean, and I go to another church and they're like, psych, you're a sinner and you're going to hell for eating clean meats. It has happened to me, by the way.
Yeah, that's our perfect example.
Well, let's go ahead and dive right into how this all started. So a little bit ago, like, what was it, the beginning of this week, Carter?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So he sends me this TikTok of some guy who went to great lengths to not get demonetized or whatever the equivalent is on TikTok, so that they couldn't find him. He misspells a bunch of words, but it's very clear what he's talking about. He's talking about the gay, and he's talking about he posits that apparently the word homosexual wasn't originally found in any English translations of the Bible. They were added in after the fact in the 80s by the Catholic Church, because the word that was there beforehand was the word pedophile. And of course he asks the rhetorical question, why would priests have a problem with the word pedophile in the Bible? And why would they change it to something else? So, like, I got a great kick out of it. Like, I was like, oof, if that's true, that's super spicy.
It's a spicy take.
That feeds my Adventist anti-Catholic genes quite well. I'm feeling real Protestant tonight, lads.
Yeah.
I got really excited, like I do, whenever I find something borderline
juicy
like that. I was like, yo, this can't possibly be true, right? Like that. Like, if this was true, Adventists would be like frothing at the mouth to denounce the Catholic Church. We would be pro-gay all day.
If we liked gay people.
If we liked gay people, like, this would be, like, I could already see it. We would incorporate this into the mark of the beast somehow. Like, we'd find a way.
Oh my god.
But instead, we fall in line with basically everybody else, which is the gay is bad. Don't do the gay, and but we love you anyway. But please don't do the gay.
It's always like, we love you anyway, but you need to change it. But we love you. We want you here. We're not going to make you a member, though. But we love you. But, like, we think you're going to hell unless you change.
But we're here for you.
But, you know, if you want to talk about it, we'll talk about it. And we're going to tell you we're not going to judge you. And so I was like, hang on a second.
We won't judge you out loud.
It's like, where is the love and going like, I think you're going to hell, but I love you.
Can you just imagine God sitting on his throne, like, watching all these people like, I love you guys, see you in hell?
Yeah.
Pulls the trap door.
It's like God watches us with subtitles, and the subtitles is what we're thinking, and it's totally different for what we're saying.
Subs over dubs.
Subs over dubs any day, dude.
Yes, subs over dubs.
God watches the human anime with subs on. Change my mind.
What language?
Does God speak?
Language of love.
I guess the Bible literally says, and he spoke. So let's just take that out and scratch that.
Going back to the podcast, though, it's also interesting because, did I say podcast? TikTok. If they changed it, is also, there's a verse that's saying you cannot change one dot, one tittle, or there'll be grave consequences, essentially, or woe is to them. And that
wasn't a discussion for tonight, but I'm glad you brought it up. So this is actually...
Yeah, is it in that Revelation too?
Isn't it?
If one word is changed? Not. Or is no?
No, this is a really common misconception that people have, that if we remove words or add words to the Bible, that there's some curse on you. It's true that if you add anything to Revelation or subtract from Revelation, there is a curse on that.
Oh, it's just the one book.
That we have no indication that it applies to the rest of the Bible, but Protestant's going to Protestant, and they're like, yo, all of these books have been written at the same time by the word of Jesus, therefore they all apply to each other, which is not how the Bible works most of the time. You know, like, John wrote this collection of visions that he had, or maybe one big vision, we're not entirely sure. And that's actually my first heretical point, is who knows if the book of Revelation was written in one take or not. Given all the spelling mistakes that have permeated the book of Revelation, it was probably written in one take, but still interesting to think about.
Well, wasn't he like on an island starving to death?
No, he was on a penal. He was on a penal island, but he wasn't starving to death that we know of. He might have been, but Jesus fought off the devil while he was starving after 40 days. So
That's fair.
If he can do it,
you gonna say that the big Jesus was hallucinating the devil? Because we'll write you down for a heretical point.
I would love to.
if anyone was there, could they see him though?
Once you get to the Gospels, it's like that's pretty
historically
recent.
accurate, yeah.
Yeah, it's like I think I was in middle school, and so I was like, I mean, like Jesus was made up. I was like, dude, no. Like we have other primary sources that we can go to. Josephus wrote about him, and also it's like, so you get back 2,000 years, and you've got. Now I'm not a historian. I'm not going to pretend like I'm some authority on how far back you can go before stuff starts getting murky. But if I'm going to peg somewhere, 2,000 years ago is a pretty good time of like, we still have lots of good records that have survived. And I feel like it's easier to interpret meaning. This is something I was hoping you might be able to touch on, Eli, is, we've got ancient Hebrew texts and now not necessarily modern, but more recent Greek texts that we've combined together into one book. And then we've translated them into English and gone, yep, it's perfect. So you have cultural nuances that are just obliterated.
Yes.
Because it's like, one, we're translating it into English, which is just the bastard language of every other language out there. At least
it is
from Western cultures,
which is why I always read it in Spanish.
Cultural nuance. We just don't have the same amount of words to describe a concept and the nuances to it. So it's like, as Protestants, we stand on most of us stand on, Bible and the Bible only. Thanks, Martin Luther. But then also, where does that stand when we're all reading it in a translation and we're reading works from multiple points in history, from multiple cultures, split into two different languages? And then we end up at pedophile.
Yeah.
So here's
Change to homosexual.
There's a word for what happens here. If it's true that the word homosexual was added after the fact, which, spoiler alert, it is. I went and I looked at the history, and it's very clear. It turns out that the word homosexual did not exist in the German Bible until the 80s. Okay, notice I said the German Bible. In the English translations, which this was something that the TikTok didn't mention, in the English translations, the word homosexual was shoved into the translation as early as the 1920s.
Oh,
I wasn't able to find
TikTok said like 1946, right? That's what they said.
Now I don't know which I wasn't able to find out which specific translation it was, but apparently as early as the 1920s. Now keep in mind, that's 1,900 years after the time of Jesus. That's still a long time.
Yeah.
Now, granted, English didn't exist for the entirety of that time. So the question still stands. Like, what other ways do I have was my natural inclination? Like immediately I was like, okay, how do I figure out, how do I disprove this? And this is one of the most beautiful qualities that I picked up from the scientific method. If I can poke a hole, and really it's math, if I can poke a hole in it, then I'm done. All I have to do is disprove one point and I can go home. So I did the easiest thing I could do. I grabbed my Hebrew NASB 95. Actually, no, that's the translation for it. But I grabbed my I grabbed my Hebrew Bible. I cracked it open, and I went to that specific passage in Leviticus that talks about a man shall not lie with another man. And I was like, easy. If both instances of the word man are the same word, even if that word can mean boy, the entire argument falls apart, right? So I went and looked, because originally I went and I looked and I found the word was zakar. If a man lies with a zakar, that's a male person, but it can also mean a boy. Specifically other parts of the Bible, and I think I pulled it up. Let's see if my iPad has battery.
Yeah, I think
Another
you
place
said
in-
something in.
Another place in
Chat.
Leviticus says that a zakar, a boy, categorizes as any male that is between the age of 1 month to about 15 years old. Okay? So that's what a zakar is. I said, okay, if the first male, like if it says a man shall not lie with another man, I know the second word is zakar, so then I looked at the first word and I said, if this word isn't the same word, then this is potentially juicy. And guess what?
Same word.
It's a different word. That's dude, my was blown. Bro, my little brain. I was like, no puede ser.
And it's Hebrew too. You can't get more gold than that. I mean, Aramaic maybe. I don't know.
No,
But-
there's only 2 places in the Bible that are written in Aramaic, so Hebrew is the way to go. And like
Yeah.
that, because up until that point,
which
I was
books
like,
are in Aramaic?
parts of Daniel are in Aramaic, and I believe
Oh,
parts
parts?
parts of Daniel, because Daniel confirmed 100% was not written in one take. In fact,
That makes sense.
most biblical historians agree that the book of Daniel is technically 2 books, and we should have divided it into 2 books, like we have divided, the books of Samuel, or
Chronicles,
Or
Kings, etc.
but of course the Hebrews they don't see First and Second Kings, they see just the book of Kings. So it can really go either way. When I saw this, that these were 2 completely different words, like they don't even look the same. One of them is zakar, which means boy or man or male person. And when it's man, it's very specifically a young man, versus is or ish, depending on your pronunciation of it. Ish is the word for man, husband, or human being, or adult male. It also means basically any individual. The word ish doesn't only refer to men biologically. Like you don't have to have a penis to be an ish. Like you can be a woman.
So it's personhood.
It's the generic term, and this happens a lot in other non-English languages. I mean, even English kind of did it until the whole let's get rid of man because it's not gender inclusive enough came along. Like in Spanish, if I say todos los que están aquí, everyone who is here, that's all technically in the masculine form, but it's not that it's masculine, it's that that's the general gender, or it's a general gender,
because it's
and then
the O, using the O
things,
instead of
and then feminine things have their own gender, like they have their own ending. So it's not that men have an ending and women have an ending. In Spanish, everything is male unless you want to define it as being female. So if you say el gato, that word is, quote, masculine. But as soon as you say la gata, that's very clearly a female cat. Now, both el gato and la gata could be female cats. It just depends on how specific you want to be. So the same thing is happening here in Hebrew. The word ish or is is man or male or human person. It's a person. If a person sleeps with a young boy, as he does with a woman,
basically,
like if you penetrate a boy, you should be stoned to death, is what the law says.
I was gonna say it's probably gonna be stoning.
It really should be something.
And not the Colorado variety.
Not the Colorado variety.
No.
What's really sad about this is that both the male and the boy have to be stoned to death. So, and then that's a really clear reminder, I think, anytime that we're looking at these passages, like clearly this is not a 1-to-1. Even in this specific scenario where it's very clearly pedophilia, it's not an easy pedophiles and their victims should be stoned. That's what the Bible teaches, right? We still have interpretive issues.
Yeah.
Oh, what's that? Your uncle raped you? Wow, off to the stoning room you go.
Yeah.
Now just to kind of clarify, so the car is sure that that will not be ever referred to like a young woman.
Correct.
Yeah.
It'll never be referring to a young woman.
And then in the context of in Hebrew what a young man, at least culturally, what a young man would be. Is that a young man who's before marrying age, or because I know, at least my impression is that our idea of what an adult is doesn't necessarily line up with what historical adulthood would be in a lot
Age
of
of
societies.
consent is definitely different nowadays from
When you might die at 40, and that's like pretty old, and you get to 80 and they're like, dang, he's ancient. And now it's like you get to 80 and it's like, yeah, it's a pretty good life. Like, probably could have gotten to 90. So when we're associating like what is a young man, I guess what or a young male individual, how young is that?
So as young as 1 month old is what I was able to find. And I was able to get that specifically from the NASB. Now I asked in my seminary, the professors who have, you know how in Union we have the religion division?
Mm-hmm.
Well, here we have the religion school, and then in that school we have divisions of like the history division, the preaching division, the discipleship division, like that. Like it's really big. So I asked the religion division, the languages divisions, and they said, because we had a colloquium with them, they said that the translation that they prefer as being the most literally accurate to both the historical understanding of those words and the theological and the cultural equivalent to those words is the NASB for the Old Testament. The NASB doesn't count for the New Testament. That's the ESV, is what the Greek scholars say. So I went ahead and I took their word for it. And the NASB translates the majority of these as being young males. So anything ranging from adolescence down to boyhood. An adolescent was considered anything under the age of like 15.
Mm-hmm.
So I took a look at that and I said, that is very interesting. I wonder what some of the other translations have to say. And out of all of them, I think, let me check again, the King James Version is one of the only versions that the King James Version and the Lexington English Bible, both of them go out of their way to not call it a young man. They always call it just a straight up man, which is kind of interesting.
Yes.
Mark that one up as another point against the King James.
But like it's
on life support.
The Bible. It's the Bible to end all Bibles. If it's not King James, I don't want it.
Bro, I had a member who told me, like, Pastor, I'll give you $12 for every baptism that you can get without the King James Version because I don't think it can be done. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna need a lot of money because our whole church was baptized without using King James Bibles. Sorry. He's like, what are you doing, bro? I was like, we all speak Spanish. We don't have the King James.
Boom, roasted.
So of course he backpedaled. He was like, no. That's not what I'm saying. The Textus Receptus. And I was like, yeah. Listen, buddy, I get it. It doesn't matter. Just admit your defeat, move along with your day, and we can both enjoy the rest of our evenings without thinking about it too much.
Save your money
for any excuse to
You played yourself on that one, bud.
Yeah, congratulations, you played yourself. So it gets actually a little bit juicier than this. So I went ahead and I took a look and I said, okay, but what about the New Testament? Because Paul very clearly looks at this issue and then references this passage and says that they're homosexual. So maybe he had an understanding about the way that they were using these words that maybe in the context only a Hebrew person would have really understood, like Paul. Well, it turns out that the word that Paul uses is not homosexual. And that's where I was like, shoot, this is gonna be a really big deal.
There's a conspiracy.
Yeah, there's a straight up conspiracy. This is becoming juicy. So at this point I was like, okay. I don't need to know the what anymore. I need to know the how. How did this happen? So down the rabbit hole I go. I started looking online, like saying like, what happened? where, like, whose idea was it? Was it really the Catholics? So I went ahead and I looked up, okay, well, where should I start? So believe it or not, I ended up in a very unlikely place, which is the statements given out by the Methodist Church. For those of you who don't know, the Methodist Church, like, I think it was in the early 2010s, they basically decided that if you were gay, you weren't a sinner and you could be a pastor. I think it was the early 2010s. I'm like very certain. If you quote me, I'll own up to it, and if I'm wrong, I'll accept it.
And I bet they got flamed by everyone.
Bro, they went through a split. Their church split because, well, obviously some people didn't like that. And so now this is why you'll find some churches that are called the United Methodist Church, and some of the smaller country churches are still called Methodist Church, and they do not mingle. The United Methodist Church, you can probably imagine, is more progressive. They have female reverends or female pastors, and they believe that homosexuality isn't spoken against. And they have this entire statement of beliefs, basically affirming, like, these words in Greek do not mean what we say they mean today, and this was introduced later after the fact. So
wow,
they also I don't remember if it was on their page or somewhere else. I saw somebody had done a paper where they took a look at how the Protestant reformers interpreted those words. Because we're talking about my boy Martin Luther here, who translated the Bible for like the first time in ages into the common folk language, which was German for him. You know, he takes the Latin and he's like, we can't read this. How's anybody supposed to understand this? And he goes ahead and he translates it. And guess how he translated it?
How did he translate him?
Child molester.
Oh, the church isn't careful.
This is like triple confirmation. Testament, New Testament.
He nailed
now
95 reasons to adore that they didn't have, or they had 95 reasons not to like him.
No.
95
reasons, they only needed one.
They only needed one. And this one wasn't even written on there. Okay, he, like... And the interesting thing is that there's no historical commentary that points to this being a controversial.
They just overlook it.
Which brings us to that.
It was a non-issue.
This was a non-issue, and in German Bibles, the word child molester carried all the way into the 80s. Apparently, and this is the part I haven't figured out yet. There seems to be lots of arrows pointing in the direction of a specific U.S. company that was owned and operated by some evangelicals who threw some money out of Germany and were like, hey, change this. And they did in the 80s. I'm not sure. I don't know if it's true or not. Like, I wish that it was, because my Adventist fetish just tingles, you know? But, like, if it's true, dude, what are we even doing? Discriminating against people who just happen to like other people with the same reproductive organs. I get it that it's weird.
But, like, not just don't like actively persecute.
Yeah, in
like, they're surrounded by their communities, their families. People spend whole lifetimes in therapy based on, you know, getting thrown into conversion camps. Not conversion camp. Well, that's what I'm looking for. The Pray the Gay Away camps.
Yeah.
I think there was a little bit of a
gay conversion therapy.
Yeah, the gay conversion therapy.
Yeah,
we know what we know what we mean.
Yeah, we know. If you know, you know.
So, like, the next thing that I did, you know, because this all happened within a matter of days, I was so excited about it. I was like, yo, did you know about this? I go to my friends here at the seminary, and one of my closest friends, bless his heart, like, he was actually like, oh, whoa, for real? Wow, let me add that to my list of reasons I don't like the Catholic Church. And, you know, he took it surprisingly well. He didn't even question me. He was like, oh, dang, like, that makes a lot of sense. Granted, he's from Santa Cruz, so take that with a grain of salt, I guess. But he's super chill, dude. We've become the best of friends. Some of our other mutual friends, however, they had a different response. So of the several pastoral friends that I talked to, the majority of the response was kind of indifferent. I wish I could have said that people were like violently opposed to it, but they were just like, it doesn't really matter. I already believe that gays are bad.
And they're going to teach their congregations that way.
Yeah, but we gotta love them.
Religion anymore now.
I mean, you were going there. I thought you were going to say, they were just like, oh, well, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. But no. You came back around and yes, okay, they do still hate the gays. Thank you for clarifying that.
Oh, very much. None of them would ever come out and say that, though. Like, no, we don't hate the gays. We just are unconvinced. The sin, brother, the sin.
Yeah, because I
don't know.
They'll just, yeah. I mean, it is a tough subject because it was Adam and Eve in the beginning, not Adam and Adam, and that's what they'll usually point to.
Right. And as much as I like to pick on people for saying like, but we hate the sin, but we love them. As easy as that is to pick apart, it's not that easy when we translate it. Like, let's assume that it was just for the sake of entertainment, that it was a confirmed sin. Jesus is sending you to hell for liking someone else with a penis. Let's pretend that it was. Then, in that same vein, do we just like not acknowledge that there are some things that we classify as sin or that God classifies as sin, and we are clearly abhorrent to them, like pedophilia, like child molesting? Like, you can how do you say like, we still love you but we hate your sin? How do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, it's easy to laugh about it when it's gays. It's not so easy to laugh about it when it's anything else. I think part of it is because, well, homosexual people, it's something that apparently for most of the time may have been considered an innuendo, or not an innuendo, a taboo, but it wasn't outright explicitly stated in the Bible that it was wrong. So this is where I want to take
it's a gray area to begin with because the Bible doesn't mention it very much.
So this is my heretical take. My heretical take is that if the Bible is talking about homosexuals, it's not talking about them in those passages. I don't know where those passages would be, but it's not those. There are two passages or two stories that people will cite, because I actually got this far in the conversation with one of them. I won't say his name because he didn't want to be on the podcast. But he basically said, okay, assume that's true. What about Sodom and Gomorrah? And what about Noah and his son, Ham? Do you guys know those two stories?
Yeah.
Reiterate for the podcast's sake.
Thank you. I like the way you think, Carter. The Sodom and Gomorrah story first. Basically, some angels show up to Lot's door, and all the dudes in the city, yes, all of them, the Bible says, show up, and they're like, hey, come out. We want to have sex with you. Let us see the men. We want to do the gay. All of us. Right now. And Lot says, please don't do this. This is evil. And that's where it gets left at. And from there, people extrapolate, see, they were being gay, and God destroyed them for that.
Brimstone.
Wait, but you're telling me if they just wanted to rape a bunch of women, everybody's okay with that?
They did though. They did rape two women.
They sure did. They grabbed the Lots was like,
daughters.
Hey, Becky and Tina, come here. You guys out there now, because heaven forbid they do the gay.
So the takeaway is that if you see a gay person, offer them your daughter.
Both of them, both your daughters.
Both daughters.
One's not good enough because you see, men are so tasty.
Oof.
So, like, there's a ton of problems with that story to say that the thing they were killed or destroyed for was specifically a man attracted to another man. I think that's a bit specific for the very... I think that's a bit broad for the very specific thing that Sodom and Gomorrah was doing, is my personal opinion. And it seems like Sodom and Gomorrah was trying to gang rape two angels that had come to the door. Like, I think that's a very different thing than one man consensually sleeping with another man. You see what I'm saying? Those are two very different things.
I actually saw
They're both
someone talk about this on Twitter today, which, like, you know, I mean, all my primary sources come from Twitter, but it stuck with me. I've been chewing on it. And the tweet reads, it's from Jane Claiborne. Despite what you may have learned in Sunday school, this is what the Bible says about the sins of Sodom. What was the sin of Sodom? She was arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned for the poor. And that's found in Ezekiel 16:49. So the sins are arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned.
Sounds pretty gay to me.
That they were, you know, it's like those appear to be the root sins, and then depravity emerges out of it. But it's not the depravity. It's not to condone depravity, but
yeah, but that's the part of the Bible. That part of the Bible isn't the part of the Bible that my pastor used, so that doesn't count.
Oof.
Go ahead, James.
Oh, no, you got it. Good. I mean there.
So I think we kind of agree. Like, we see the distinct problems with that. If it was that they were gay, it's not ever mentioned later on in the Old Testament as that being the issue. Like, and I'm really glad that Gabe brought it up, but that is what happens in Ezekiel. God calls back to memory. Remember Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, this was their problem, and this is your problem today too. But he doesn't say the gay. If he does, maybe somebody omitted that somewhere in the manuscripts. But that's how it appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's how I'm going to take it.
So pivoting to Noah and Ham, you said?
That's right. So for those of you who don't remember your Sunday school or Sabbath school class, Noah and the flood. Noah builds the boat. God tells him, you got 120 years to get this done. Bring as many as you can with you. And apparently, the only people that decided to come were his immediate family and a bunch of animals. So they all hop on. They get off after the flood is done. Everybody's dead except for them. They're told to repopulate. They come out. The animals come out too. And we don't know how much time passes. But Noah decides to plant a vineyard. And he takes the wine, or the wine basically is what the Bible calls it. He takes the vineyard, makes some wine. He gets drunk, like completely drunk, to the point where his son Ham comes into his tent, sees his father's nakedness, then goes and tells his brothers. And his brothers are like, how could you do this to our father? He's old. So they go into their father's tent backwards, holding a sheet, like a blanket between them, walking backwards, and throw it onto their father's nakedness. And he uses that term, their father's nakedness, right? So what's going on there? You know, it's kind of a weird story, not gonna lie. Like, okay, Ham, you just went in and saw your father's nakedness. Well, so what was the big deal? Well, Noah wakes up, or comes to. He realizes what he's done, and he says, your son, Canaan, is going to be cursed among everybody. Was it Canaan or was it Moab? I don't even remember anymore. I should probably go look it up. But Noah basically tells Ham, your son is going to be cursed because of this evil thing that you've done. How dare you?
Because he saw it and then told other people about it instead of seeing him and covering him up?
Yeah. So, but why his son?
Harsh.
So somebody actually asked this question in a colloquium that we had, which was teaching us how to use Logos and other Bible softwares. And I've been using Logos for quite some time. But these professors, dude, are next level. These are the kinds of people, like, I always look at the packages on Logos. For those of you who don't know, Logos is a Bible software. Lots of pastors have it. It's super powerful software. I didn't realize how powerful it was. But what I did know is that it's expensive. Like, you can spend upwards of, $40,000, $50,000 to try and get almost everything there is to have in Logos. It is like incredible how much stuff there is in this thing, and like the They even have built packages for different denominations. I have the SDA package. You know, it's great. You get it when you go to Union. Apparently, Union is ahead of the game compared to other theology programs. If you're listening, you're thinking about becoming a theology major, just let me put my little Union plug right there. Union Theology Division slaps compared to others. I've confirmed it with other theology graduates from PUC, Southern, etc. Better at Union.
Just wait till it gets cheaper, then go. And that's my plugin.
So, they were like, to show you the power of Logos, to make you all a bunch of believers, we're going to have a baptism session after this, after you all confess that you believe in the power of Logos. They're like, tell us an unsolvable Bible question. And somebody was like, what was the sin of Ham? And they're like, well, we're so glad you asked, person we definitely didn't plant in the audience. Let's turn to Logos and find the answer. So they took us through, in 15 minutes, we had the answer, like in a definitive way that I have never seen in my life.
Really?
Yeah, the definitive answer is Ham raped his own mother. And the son that was cursed was the product of that rape. The way that we confirmed this is we looked at every single instance. We did a search query. We looked at every single instance where that term is translated as your father's nakedness. Because remember, Genesis was written by our boy Moses, who wrote 4 other books.
Oh, I see now.
And in all those other books, every time it talks about your father's nakedness, it's talking about his wife. Or your uncle's nakedness, like in Leviticus. It says, do not sleep with your uncle's wife. It is your uncle's nakedness. Do not sleep with your mother. It is your father's nakedness. Like, it's pretty like they showed us passage after passage after passage. So this whole idea that Ham was being gay with his dad, totally unfounded.
I was going to say, how did they repopulate the earth? Was it immediate family or the sons and their wives made it on the boat?
Genetic diversity would like to have a discussion with you.
Yeah.
So this might be something that Gabriel will be more interested in discussing about, but like repopulation and the flood and genetic diversity, it doesn't really make a lot of sense based on what we understand from things. As a science
doesn't have the genes you need to build a stable population. But we heard my take on symbolism. What?
Need some apples imported direct from Eden. It's genetic diversity in spades.
Gene cloning.
The diversiest.
They had CRISPR.
Probably. They just said dinosaurs. How did they get the dinosaurs if they didn't have CRISPR?
How do you know?
This is unreal. It's not at all related. Well, kind of. So I'm listening to. Right now, I'm on The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, but it's the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. And I don't know if this is anyone going to read this, and are they worried about spoilers?
Nope, not here. But if anybody is, spoiler alert.
Yeah, just skip the next couple seconds because I'm gonna spoil the end of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But the whole Earth is part of a supercomputer to find the answer, or to find the question to the answer of life, the universe, and everything. And the mice have been experimenting on humans. The mice are interdimensional, super intelligent beings, and the Earth is destroyed to build a superhighway 5 minutes before they have the question to the answer of life, the universe, and everything. Because they already learned the answer is 42, but they didn't know what the question was. So the protagonist is on a planet where the ancient beings made planets. They're the ones who were responsible for making the Earth. And, I got all the way into the story, and I think I'm confusing with the comic I saw. No, I'm no comic. That's so embarrassing. Well, I'm thinking of a Saturday morning breakfast cereal comic. I don't, because at some point in the last 2 weeks, I saw or heard something where they're like, oh, I'm just burying the dinosaurs to confuse the humans. I can't remember if that's actually in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
That's funny. Which also, that's
I'm gonna go find the
another
comic.
topic,
Also, it takes at least 3 years to grow a vineyard from planting to harvest. So this was at least 3 years after they came off the earth.
even if
Which
the
leads
earth is
me to
more
believe-
fertile because of the mixed, like, because the earth was upside down basically during the flood. Are you sure the ground might have been super fertile after it then?
If anything,
Would that affect the growth rate? Or just be trash?
Yeah, you wouldn't have had all of the nice nitrogen-rich compounds, and like if it was all turned up, then you have all this awful soil that just got mixed with all your good soil from underground.
Okay, fair enough.
So since we're on this tangent, here's my tangential heretical take. Here's my hot take on that. My hot take. This is not canonical. This is not the view of the Adventist Church by any stretch of the imagination. But I have a strong suspicion that God didn't just use Noah to escape the flood. So here's kind of why I think that. We have consistently through almost every single civilization, ancient civilization on Earth, has a myth of a world flood with an old man. Not an old man, sorry, with a family that gets on the boat and survives. Right?
Funny, isn't it?
And they all purportedly believe it happened in their area where they live.
Native Americans have the same thing too.
The Native Americans, the Mesoamericans have the exact same thing.
That's crazy.
Even the Asians have it, which Asians usually don't share any similarities. But they've got it too. So what gives? There's only two really satisfying solutions to this. Number one is they're all relating back to Noah, obviously, duh, because that's where everybody came back from. Explain that. Or number two, maybe God, knowing that humans had populated a pretty good portion of the earth, because apparently it required a world flood to get rid of them, took faithful people from different parts of the earth and then repopulated from there. Of course, that interpretation kind of creates some issues, which I'm not going to get into because it's too much fun to ruin it. But for now, that's kind of something I've always wondered. Like, what if God just took extra people that were Noah, and there were different Noahs throughout the world? Of course, Noah would happen to be the specific forefather of what would become the Jewish nation. So he becomes the focal point of the biblical narrative. Who's to say that in the other side of the planet there wasn't somebody else doing something? Like I said, it brings up some issues, but it's fun to think about.
Now, not to go Book of Mormon necessarily, but there is a lot of geological evidence that Native Americans were here on this continent when Jesus was walking around in the Middle East. You know, you have people that by that time had been separated from that part of the world. There are certainly, if you try to match the timelines, issues between like people walked across the land bridge during the last ice age, and it's like, well, that was kind of a while ago, so you had these like proto-humans, but I don't know how to fit that in with the Bible. That aside, there appear to be people here while Jesus was here. What about them? What about all of these native groups? Like, is there just no hope of salvation for them? Oh, we lost her.
Oh, there he is. Yeah, is there no hope of salvation for those guys?
Well, I mean, I'm not prepared to present the case, but I have heard some pretty convincing arguments that
I missed the question. Sorry.
From a Christian Bible perspective, you could make a strong argument that some of these other religions are just different reflections of the same God. And so, if you want to say that, their interpretation of the flood, even if it doesn't say Noah by name, is still probably, potentially pretty valid, including, Eli's suggestion that there were maybe holy people from different areas that were selected, and we just heard about Noah because we happen to like the Jews.
Yeah, because God apparently got focused on the Jews, and it could be that by the time that God finds, takes initiative on initiating this covenant with a human, Abraham may have been one of the only people who was faithful and perhaps strategically placed in an area that God knew was going to propagate or have the potential to propagate. We know that it ended up not happening that way because, well, the Israelites kind of sucked. Let's call a spade a spade.
Of the Old Testament.
Yeah, God was like, I've got so many plans for you kids. Come with me. Come follow Uncle Elohim. And then they were like, nah.
I want to worship a hunk of metal because it's rare and shiny.
They were like, haha. Golden idol goes burr.
That's great.
No, that's
I got straight.
I found the comic. It's in the shop. It's the one that's labeled fossils.
That's great.
Pull it up.
That's a little science here. That's what I was thinking of, and I was confusing it with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is just so embarrassing.
Nice. For those of you who are only listening to the podcast, you won't get to see it. But if you're watching the video, it's up right now. All these fossils put here to fool us into believing evolution and denying the Lord. Hey, wait a second. The devil made a design so intricate, so perfect that it matches precisely what you would expect to see in a 4 billion year long chain of evolution. And God made what? Cows? Inadvertently, Billy is convinced to worship Satan.
Oh no.
Fussing.
Did you have the one before that? The one before it is the one that I was thinking of like burying fossils.
Oh, I'm gonna have to zoom in on this one, if I can even do that. Yeah. I can't zoom in on that one. Not while I have the... Yeah, nope. I'm gonna have to check it out later. The universe is deterministic and local. Lol. I'll have to check that one out later.
That's a spicy comic. That always gets me.
Dinosaurs are always an interesting point to talk about because it's like, well, what happened to them? And you kind of hear different things about them.
Yeah, I actually have no idea what happened to them.
If they were just chilling on Earth with us and then they got killed in the flood, or what happened, I don't know. I wasn't there.
Since we are on the topic of the flood, however, I do have my own little sub-heretical theory for that one too, is that evolution is in the Bible and speciation is in the Bible, and the flood is evidence of that. Basically, God took all of the animals that were the genus or the phylum that were necessary to preserve the genetic material that was going to be needed for whatever reason, and the species that we have today are basically the descendants of these proto mammals or whatever. And so
chicken came before the egg.
The chicken came in this case the egg came before the chicken, because maybe they weren't chickens first, maybe they were something else. And perhaps,
or were they a proto chicken that laid an egg that superseded a chicken?
Right, because we definitely have because we definitely have like more species today just in the Amazon rainforest than what you can fit on the boat. And we're talking about species that cannot interbreed. Like, they can't breed within each other. There's no way.
And they're weird looking.
And they're weird looking, and like, which means since they can't breed with each other, they can't inter-reproduce. It means that if they have always existed as species, they all had to be on the boat, unless speciation is real and they made it this far. So either I'm perfectly willing to accept that maybe God just had a super amazing special boat that was like a TARDIS that was bigger on the inside than it was on the outside. I'm willing to accept that, but then why not just make a smaller boat? But I digress.
It is interesting, it almost sounds like the classic belief that God made the template and then he just kind of let it run from there. And that's kind of where evolution
all species were already created within the genetic code that existed in the species. I still believe in the literal creation week, as I've stated before, just because I don't see what the problem is. I think that it's not irreconcilable to have an old Earth with a literal creation week. For me, it's just not that big a deal, because we don't know how long it took for Adam and Eve to sin. We just don't. The Earth could have been pre-populated by the time that they sinned, and that would make Cain the very first human to be born outside of the garden. That's all it really means.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it doesn't necessarily mean that our creation was the first time life existed on the planet.
Right.
But, you know, it's
we're
people
special.
are like, well, the dinosaurs brought with them. Well, because it goes hand in hand of we were created and the earth was created. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't say that. Because if you have an earth that's been here for a long time, and there's stuff that, you know, popped up for some reason or another, created or evolved. At the end of the day, it's like, that doesn't have to contradict what's happened in our more recent history.
Yeah, I think there's more solutions to the problem than there are dead ends. Like, I think we can definitely find the dead ends. And I think that most of those dead ends are found whenever we try to be rigid in our interpretation of the Bible. Especially the parts of the Bible that Moses was very clearly rushing through to get to what he thought was important. When you think about it, you look at Genesis, it takes him, we cover the span of, I think it's 1,500 years in like 6 chapters. And then he spends the rest of the book talking about one man who like had a combined total of 40 some years traveling with God. It's very clear that the historicity of Genesis was not what was important to him. Like, it was important to establish, hey, by the way, God created us, he made this, we messed up, and now we're here, and let me tell you the story. And so then he gets into Abraham, and then Joseph, and then the Israelites, and then he goes into Moses, and all of those things. So it's I don't know. That's a different topic altogether. Anyway,
back to the gays. A good time to well, I was gonna say where it'd be a good time to segue to a different topic that we had in our list.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Does anybody have any questions for me on our previous thing?
I don't. But also, there is a part of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where the guy who made the Earth is talking about burying dinosaurs so that the geological record matches. It was in there. I've redeemed myself.
Very nice.
I was looking at our agenda items, and I saw that James was the one who brought up the first additional issue, which is vegetarianism a salvation issue? Ditto for the Sabbath. We're taking
a salvation issue. Oh goodness.
Yeah, is it a salvation issue?
And dare I say, shall we go off on bacon as well? Because Adventists, a lot of them are still against pork, even if they're cool with beef.
I mean, pork has its own issues just as a meat product.
Especially nowadays. So, Adventists for a long time have been all about like clean and unclean meats. Which, fun fact, isn't present in the New Testament. Is present in the New Testament, not in the way we usually think of it.
There's a big stink about it in the New Testament.
Yeah, so apparently in the New Testament, the church fathers, John, Peter, Andrew, had to get together, and they were like, hey, we're having a lot of new converts come in who aren't Jewish. What defines a Christian, right? And so one of the things that they said was, well, they need to believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that he was who he said he was, and that what he taught is binding for us morally. They also should do a couple of these things, and they kind of list some things like don't sacrifice meat to idols and then eat it. Don't eat meat with blood in it, so eat kosher meat. But they never make reference to clean and unclean meats. Some people have taken that to mean, so then that must not have been an issue. Could also be that they were, just like a fish who swims in water isn't aware of the water he swims in. Could be they just weren't aware that was a problem. Like they may have just assumed, hey, don't eat unclean meats because that's nasty. Just like today, a lot of Christians are like, don't sleep with another man. That's nasty. So that could...
Even if the Bible doesn't say it, like, no, man, it's just common sense. You can't have gay. Like, I don't know, like, you guys didn't know that?
Yeah, like, do you guys do the gay?
Oh my god.
So, by the way, that's tongue in cheek. Like, I'm saying, like, they may not have been aware that would become an issue later on. Just like they don't say, like, they must keep the Sabbath. Right? So, it's not clear that the New Testament church was expecting Gentile converts to leave behind unclean meats, but they were very clear about leaving behind meat that had blood in it. So eating meat that wasn't cooked all the way, basically. So that's kind of interesting, you know. That disqualifies a lot of.
So a really bloody steak is a no-go.
That's a no-go according to the church fathers.
What you're telling me is that if I get a very nice A5 Wagyu beef tenderloin, I can't have it rare.
That's right. You gotta cook that baby until it's a puck.
I just
you just lost all the chefs. I'm sorry. There's not a single one left listening.
Oh man, yeah. So that was their take back then. Is diet a salvific issue today? I don't know. There's two. I think that it really comes down to is health, diet in the context of health, is health a moral issue or not? Like, is God morally interested in our health? Yes or no? And I think the way that we answer that kind of defines how we answer that question, but it also has some ramifications, which I know all of you guys are thinking of. If we answer yes, if we say yes, it is God is morally interested, or God is interested in our health,
because our bodies are a temple,
then the implications are that it's not just eating unclean meats that becomes a moral issue. It's those ramens I had at 2 a.m.
Oh man,
the
really
principle, because
you're telling me I can't have chocolate?
Is chocolate unhealthy?
No, chocolate or Big Frank.
Yeah, actually,
Imagine a war.
What about the time that I left pizzas out for like 3 days and ate them?
Bro, okay, you are straight up in hell.
Or when that cheesy popcorn got you baked in the dorm and it stunk up the room.
This is actually
jalapeno cheese.
all those ramen noodle soups, dude. It's so delicious. What about all those fried chicken and Adventist meats that are super high in sodium? Are those healthy? And if they're not, is it morally wrong to eat them? If it is a moral issue to be healthy.
Is it a salvation issue to eat Big Franks is really the real question.
If your pastor, I feel like you can't complain. I mean, you know.
Go ahead, James. Or not James. I heard what James said. What did you say, Gabe?
Gabe.
Oh, what constitutes what's healthy? Like, that's so subjective.
Is it?
It
because
is.
I would argue it is, because there are things that in moderate, like it for me, I see it as a moderation issue of some dairy isn't going to kill you, or not isn't going to kill you. Like, there are benefits to having or consuming products like dairy. Not to say there aren't also problems like cholesterol. Like, I guess more of my point is, for anything that you go like, oh, that's good for me, in excess will also be bad for you.
Right.
And also has some parts of it that aren't great, other than maybe like straight up vegetables, but then you're lacking nutrients because you need more complex foods in your diet. So there's always like a gotcha. No matter what you eat, there's something like, well, this part of it isn't good for me. And some
drinking too much water can kill you.
Yes, it can. If you drink enough of it very quickly, it's called drowning.
People have died. Yep, people have died too.
Yo, but Gabe, I like where you're going with that, but here's the problem with that thinking. That's only approaching the policies of health without really focusing in on the principles of health, right? Like, I can make the policy, don't eat pork because that's really bad for you. That's a policy. The principle behind that is, don't destroy your body unnecessarily by eating stuff that's bad for your body, right? And it's not saying like this specific food is always bad for your body, they can mean all sorts of things, but the policy remains the same. So, or pardon me, the principle remains the same. Policies can change and vary, but if principles are static, principles can be static, and I would even say they can even be gradient. Policies can be really set and concrete, but the principles can be gradient and set at the same time. So, for example, if the principle is to treat your body with respect, then the policies that you create for yourself, the policies that you follow, whether that's being plant-based or having a focusing on having a very good balance of meats to vegetables to whatever it is, it leaves the interpretation for what are healthy practices a lot more open-ended, but it's still, the principle is still the same thing. Treat your body with respect, or be healthy about your body. So in other words, I'm saying, like, health can still be a non-issue. Like, if we treat health as a policy, yes, like, that's a big issue, because it's not always going to be true that one specific practice is always going to be healthy. Right?
I think in a way you kind of answered the question, is like, as far as health being a salvation issue, and I think it's boils down to treat your body with respect, and that's all you really need.
So it sounds like I've answered the question, but I've actually made it, like I said earlier, I've made it a lot harder on Adventists, because if health and treating our bodies with respect is a moral issue, how do we treat things like deliberately doing extreme sports or hard-hitting physical contact sports? Are those things effectively morally wrong because we're destructive to our own bodies? Or eating things that are just like habitually eating things that are high in sodium and high in fat cholesterol, or habitually,
or sugar. That's always going to be my downfall.
Yo, for real though. Or habitually staying up all night.
Scoop of ice cream at the end of the day.
Like,
knocking back a ginger beer.
Is it morally wrong?
It's 2 a.m. motorcycle insurance research. Is that going to send me to hell, man? That's what I need to know here.
Oh, you'll be first in line.
Yeah, so for me, the answer is still not closed, because I still think, like, okay, if we make this a principle issue, that just makes things worse, because now it's no longer just not abstaining from unclean meats. Now I've got to be mindful about being healthy, or else God is upset with me, which may be the case. What were you going to say, James?
I was just going to say, I'm also curious, is there a biblical distinction from like a theological perspective or whatever the proper hermeneutic, I don't know what your divisions are, but is there actually an argument for there being things that may have been called a sin, at least in the English version, that aren't actually a moral issue that God's going to, have on your permanent record, kind of a thing, versus something that's more suggestive for your own personal benefit and for your happiest life?
Yes, actually. So I actually wasn't planning on bringing this up until a lot later, so we can make this its own episode. But did you know that the Bible doesn't say that telling lies is a sin?
I did. Because it's phrased as don't bear false witness against your brother.
Neighbor.
Don't accuse falsely. Don't say things like, so remember when Jesus was standing trial and they brought in a bunch of false witnesses to say, like, oh yeah, we saw him stealing or pushing this old lady down in the road. Those were false witnesses. That was raising false witness against Jesus. He stole candy from a baby. That's what the commandment says. Now we interpret that later on and we say that's, if you tell a lie, that's wrong, which then of course creates paradoxes. Like, what if I lie to the Gestapo about there being Jews in my home?
Every
freaking time. It's the same thing comes up. Well, a really simple solution is to say that's not what the commandment says. The commandment literally says, don't raise false witness against, that's saying incriminating your neighbor. So we today, in our English translation, have parts of the Bible that say, liars belong to Satan. And we see that, and with our American perspective on those English words, we're like, dang, lying is wrong.
Thou shalt not lie.
Now it's true. Like today, lying is not a good thing. Emily and I were talking about someone who we found out they're caught in a web of lies. Like we thought they were, we realized that they were lying about something, and we found out through some other means that they were, not only were they lying about that, they were covering it up with another lie. And we were like, whoa, this person is really, really deep on their own web of lies. And I'm like, I can relate to that because I, as a kid, lied a lot. And so, telling falsehoods, even though it may not be explicitly stated in the Bible, don't tell falsehoods, it's probably good advice.
But also, you're not going to be damned for all eternity for lying to the Gestapo to protect persecuted people hiding under your floorboards.
So you made a good point there, but I guess maybe what I was thinking more along the lines was, if the actual correct interpretation was don't lie at all, is there kind of any argument to say that maybe the phrasing is different between something that says, you really will go to hell for this or something versus, just, well, it's good for you not to lie, so we're saying don't do it, kind of a situation there.
Yes. Okay. I understand your question a lot better now. And I don't mean to bring us back around.
Besides that, though, of course, that was nice and spicy too.
Nice. I don't mean to bring us back around to the gay, but the gay. The Bible says, and let's use a different example than the gay, but in that same context, it says, a man shall not lay with a goat as he does with a woman. I am the Lord. Right? So he says, don't sleep with goats. That's gay.
That's bestiality,
Stop that.
But
get some help. You and the goat will be stoned to death.
Yeah, that's true. They probably would be both.
So, dang, I do not want to be a part of those trials. Can you imagine, man? Like that, God had to make that rule. God had to say, stop, don't do that.
Because
yeah. That's one of those those laws that you're like, oh man, who's the guy who had to have this made for? What was it? There's one I wrote the other day that was some of these states though.
Well, a lot of hockey rules were created because one of the players basically pulled an Eli, and all he did all game was cheat without cheating. So they had to keep on making these rules, like you're not allowed to build a snowman in the middle of the ring as your goalie.
Is that a real?
Yeah, that's a real, I think the specific terminology is not to make any mound of snow on the court as long as a hockey game is in session. Because he literally made a pile of snow. He gathered all the snow that was accumulating, piled it in front of his goal so that, well,
they couldn't score unless they lifted it up.
So then guess what he did? So then
mounted it out of the goal.
So he picked up the goal and would move it around so they couldn't score. So now there's also a rule that says you're not allowed to grab the goal or move it while the game is in session.
Wow.
So there's actually...
And you wonder... Well, I think that line of thinking is what maybe the Pharisees and the Sadducees fell into a trap thinking, is they kept creating more and more laws for more and more instances.
Definitely. So we have these issues that, coming back to James's question, we have these issues that God comes out and he says, don't do that. That's wrong. But he doesn't actually say that those are sins. Now, they sound pretty bad, so we're very inclined to call them sins, but it's important to note that the word sin doesn't appear in there. And so it could be that God isn't calling these salvifically, morally Like, okay, you had sex with that goat, you're disqualified from coming to heaven. Now, if he does make it a disqualification, I'm all for it. But I'm just letting you know that's not what he says. He leaves the door wide open.
Hey, we're gonna have some people up here. Just everybody be aware. We're gonna have some people up here like goats. All right.
They really like goats.
They're coming in on the third bus. Just be ready, you know.
Well, that brings us to the topic of, isn't there only one unpardonable sin? And that's the constant rejecting of the Holy Spirit?
Yeah, it seems to be that. We don't know for sure. Some pastors, mostly those who are balding with glasses, tend to be like, no, this is what it is. It's distinctly rejecting your conscience over and over again until you can no longer hear your conscience. That's what the unpardonable sin is, according to some pastors with bald heads, and many people who agree. But we don't know for sure.
It's more open-ended than what they presented as.
Whatever it was, Jesus seemed to think that the people who were listening knew what it was.
That was the gay. It's got to be.
Boom, confirmed. Full circle, boys. Doing the gay is the unpardonable sin. Have you committed the gay? Are you listening to this podcast? Have you been gay? Well, then, like, I guess you have license to do literally anything because you're unredeemable.
There you go.
Tongue in cheek, folks. Tongue in cheek. I feel like someone's gonna get really upset at our podcast, even though we have to put a disclaimer.
We'll make sure.
I mean, that largely assumes someone's ever gonna like listen to this.
Facts.
Other than us.
See, that just that brings back those vibes from high school English class, where your teacher's talking about how this book is written with so many deep themes and all that, and we've gotten all this information out of it, like, oh man, he meant this one, and the other guy, the author back when is just sitting like, oh man, I really like this sky. I'm going to talk about the sky in depth, and whatever. He's just using completely not deep. But then the author's like, and this symbolizes his struggle with depression.
Yo,
definitely could read
for those classes.
Sometimes it felt like you were asked to pull.
Hey guys, welcome back to.
Really, the author wasn't.
They ask you how you.
Give me a hot sec right here. Ah, here it is. Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Did you guys ever read this poem?
Yeah.
Oh.
Whose woods these are, I think I know. This is in the public domain, so we're safe. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year, he gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Thank you for listening to the NPR radio today. No, so this actually is a perfect example of what he just brought up. When I was in high school, we had to do a report trying to get in the mind of Robert Frost to try and figure out, so why do you think Robert Frost used this word right here? And I remember thinking like, yo, because that word rhymes.
I know.
I really want to use this symbol, and this word just conveniently also happens to rhyme. Like, it's always the other way around of like, God dang, I need a word that rhymes.
That's literally me when I write poetry. Does it rhyme? Check. All right, we're Gucci.
Profit.
No, when the word doesn't rhyme.
Like Ellen White. Oh, wait, you have to save that topic for another time. Too soon.
Well, yeah, we did. Let's see. I was meant to ping Jesse when we get kind of towards the end here because he wanted to come talk about politics as well. So I might see if I can get him in
Let's
here.
do it. Let's talk about freedom oil.
Mixing of religion and politics, and how that's affecting.
I kind of have to. Like, I should probably go, but also I really don't want to hear Jesse's take on this, or I don't want to miss it.
Like I said, I don't want to hear it.
The one he talked about, because he was on the phone with Ellen actually before I came in here, and he had mentioned that he really wanted to talk about how Americans always are quick to assume that freedom is, the highest state of being, whereas he sees a strong argument for saying, freedom is, good in some situations, but there's a higher calling, from maybe more of a collectivist take on things.
Interesting.
So that's one of the topics he wanted to discuss anyways. And I would love to just, I'm not sure we have any registered Republicans in here, or at least anybody who would have voted for Trump that I could complain to and argue with. But
Trump's a man of God changed.
Maybe one of our friends. I don't know if he voted for him or not. I'm not sure.
I said Trump's a man of God changed my mind.
Oh,
he is one of God's children. You cannot refute that fact.
But if you cling to that idea, there's nothing that's going to change your mind. You've had to suppress so much stuff to reach that conclusion. Like, I wrestled with this for a long time. Of like, how do you get through to people that are just like feel like they're living in an alternate world? And it's like, oh, maybe you just don't. Like, to get there, you've just had to like cut off so much. And essentially reach the place where the only thing that you think you can trust is your own brain. And at that point, what can you say?
The same thing I always say. We'll see you in hell. No,
I'll see.
I don't know. I had a church that was full of people like this. And it was really sad. Because the last churches that I pastored were churches that I grew up in, remember? Like, as a kid. When my parents immigrated to the United States, these were some of the first churches that we went to, and I was an infant. I was Lena's age. So they remember me from, many of the members there remember me from being an infant. They were young adults, some of them, when we got there, and now they're old. So it's really weird, like, hey, how do you feel about... How do you feel about what this president is saying about Mexicans when I'm a Mexican and you've known me since he's not talking about you.
No, he's talking about all the rapists they're bringing in and all the drug addicts and
How come he's not?
It's which is of course 89% of all Mexicans are registered sex offenders. I mean, that's just a staple fact in the CDC database. So
of course, I read it on the back of my cereal box.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had just random stats on cereal. Who wants to start a cereal company? Let's just make ridiculous boxes.
The onion flakes.
Onion flake.
Honestly, though, we can make an onion-flavored cereal, and we're just going to put Wikipedia articles on it.
But only
like, here's the Wikipedia page
The
for
onion
bean
is
eating.
a tire, so.
So I guess here's a kind of an interesting idea. I guess, is there any solution to the division that seems to be growing, and is this division even really new in American politics specifically?
There's got to be a fresh conversation for that.
I mean, we've got a few minutes here. Why don't you start us off if you've got to leave?
Okay.
Not to put anybody on the spot, of course. I mean, I'm not prepared either with anything on this particular topic. But
Wait, what was the question?
So, is there anything you could realistically do to address the division, or is it just going to be kind of, we're going to flip-flop between Trump and Bernie Sanders for the next 8 years? And then the ones that follow up, is this level of division anything new?
Okay, and now I can understand. Go ahead, Gabriel.
a lot of time thinking about that, especially leading up to Trump actually being elected, and then listening to the way that people have talked over the last 4 years. And there's just a lot of heartbreaking things that come out of people's mouths. And then you've got like this far right group of people in this country that really are just living in their own fantasy. And it's like, the more holes they get poked, what's that?
It's a coal.
Yeah, and so the more holes you poke in their theories and their ideas, the more insane ideas they just start plugging the holes with. And it's like they end up so scared that they just, it's like it confirms, like it's self-confirming of like, oh my goodness, like the more holes, the more I have to explain, and the more like, it's like it sounds more and more ludicrous, and they somehow seem more and more convinced. But because I, lived with someone, and we had conversations about these, and it's like it just never felt like we were talking about the same world. And it's like, when everything's a conspiracy, like how do you even approach conversations about what's true and not true, because you don't have a common like source to refer to when you're going like, okay, well, we've got news articles and books and journals, and it's like, well, but that's all corporate conspiracy covering up the truth, and like the only thing you can trust is like InfoWars, or what's the new one? QAnon, 4chan. When can we believe anything that comes out of 4chan? Anyway,
if you really want to stick to the source, it's C-SPAN and NPR.
Honestly, though,
or even better, firsthand, third-party media.
So
no gas, no brakes.
I think it depends.
That's what I was about to say.
I think it depends on what issue you're talking about, because there's so many divisive issues. We've got race, we've got, talking about homosexuality. That's still, or not still,
it's
but
very
it's
relevant
extremely
today.
divisive.
Yeah.
The size of government, the types of social programs that we have, our healthcare system,
them.
like there's issues that divide people left and right. And I look at some of them, and I think the only one that I can look at and go like, I'm not like I'm worried about it, but I'm worried about it in a different way than the others, and that is on race. Because I will start with, we have a long way to go to really reach a place as a society where the sins we've committed against our brothers and sisters in the past are so far back that the ripples are small. Because I think people that don't see racism as an issue are willfully ignorant of how briefly ago in our history people held slaves, and how briefly, and I say brief, like 50, 60 years ago was the dawn of the civil rights movement. 50, 60 years ago, Black people couldn't vote in this country. And it's
in some cases still can't vote, because you have certain parties that are making it difficult for specifically minorities who may, let's say, for signature verification, they may have hyphens in their names, and if those don't exactly match their driver's license, their vote gets thrown out. So a lot of times they still can't vote.
So it's still a very big issue that we need to address as a society. That being said, the progress that we've made, because the way I see it is humans do not make quick progress. Progress as a species happens over hundreds of years on social issues, issues between each other. And it's like when there's grandparents that, they were kids in a time where they were taught that they were superior because of where they were born and for the color of their skin. They're grandparents now. Like, that doesn't just disappear overnight. There's still people with deeply rooted prejudice. And I think some of this just has to die out.
It's a generational thing.
But it gives me hope, because it's like, I don't know if you can change the hearts of some people. I don't know if it's possible. I've seen so much hate that it's like, maybe some people just are unreachable unless something traumatic happens. But if you're trend and on average you're moving people in a positive direction, then, you know, there may not be a lot of progress in our lifetime, but our kids or our kids' kids may live in a much better world.
Yes. Yes.
It might be rough getting there, but if the rate of change is greater than 0, then we're at least moving in a good direction. It's one of the only things that gives me hope, assuming a climate catastrophe doesn't wipe us out before then.
Oh man, I hope it does. Is it bad that sometimes I want bad things to happen? I want specifically the bad things they don't believe in to happen to them.
Like when Republican politicians have died of COVID, and it's like, well,
I mean, I
don't know what to tell you.
I just, you know, sometimes I find myself wishing.
I didn't think I'd get this far.
No, but honestly, like, that's something I've had to take to the Lord. I'm like, man, I don't know. I just really, really want them to get sick, or like, I just really hope that the planet explodes so that they can see, like, I guess
second meteor.
Planetary Devastation Part 2.
Is it Schadenfreude? See, how do you say it? Schadenfreude? I'll paste the word in chat. It's a German word that means pleasure derived by someone from another person's misfortune. The day after Trump got COVID, the searches for this term on Google skyrocketed.
Euphoria came across the nation.
The Bible very clearly says no, but I still want to know. Like, does God fault me for feeling this way?
Well, and it's like, how much of it is, if it's like, it's always your second reaction. Your first reaction may be impulsive, and some part of your monkey brain that's responding to it, you know, like, you see a beautiful woman,
your enemy,
and you're not going to go like, oh, she has a very nice dress, and like move on. It's the second thought of, do you dwell on that? Do you let your thoughts linger, or consciously make a decision of like, you know, I'm not going to objectify this person?
Mm-hmm. I think that's
always the second thought.
That's a really healthy way of thinking about it.
That is.
You have some Schadenfreude. You see the news. You blissfully soak in those first 3 or 4 seconds of finally, and then you go, I need to work on this.
Slow my roll.
You take it in prayer, going, help me reach a point where this is, you know, my conscious, slow thinking processes are a little better behaved than they are right now. That's the way I see it, at least. Because I definitely had some Schadenfreude going on.
I think it's an excellent way to approach life. Is you sometimes can't help your initial reaction or your first thoughts when you see someone, but it's what matters is what your thought is. Is like not letting it linger, or kind of asking yourself, wait, okay, let's slow down here and slower roll. So I agree with that line of thinking. I think it's a good way to live life.
Gabriel, I agree with you, therefore it's true.
Hey, we have Cora.
You're here. Fair enough.
Yep, you heard it here, folks. Time to go update the Wikipedia page.
We've decided this is the truth. No, I think it's fair. I think that would stand up to some solid reasoning and like searching out both logically and biblically. James, do you think there's any? What would it take to go back to a place, if there ever was one? You kind of asked that question. Like, what would it take? What do you think it would take to get back to a place where there's not this almost mindless primordial division between basically the political parties that there are now in the United States? What would it take?
Well, I think so. Let me just, I guess, set the stage on kind of my view of things. Anyways, is that the Democrat Party has basically become centrist, and they've kind of been too scared to actually pursue any leftist agenda since about Reagan, and that has kind of allowed the Republican Party to build a kind of uncontested base on the right, and it kind of starts creeping farther right. When the left moves right, the right also moves right, and so you see a lot more extremists on both sides, of course, because the leftists who don't feel represented by the Democratic Party feel wronged now by their own quote their own party, as well as the system that basically disenfranchises them from what they believe is right. And then you have the far right, which is kind of basically been, I guess, kind of fed their own echoes in a certain sense, in the sense that more far right ideas are becoming more mainstream. Like, for example, Mitch McConnell wanting to get rid of Social Security.
I gotta bounce. I definitely think we could touch on this again, and so I want to hear James's wrap up next time we have this conversation, because I think there's a lot here.
We'll hit it some other time when Jesse can join us. I think he'll have a good perspective on it. But take care, Gabriel.
See you, man.
Thank you.
Have a good
I'm gonna go
Thanksgiving.
make some Thanksgiving pies. I love you guys.
Hey, take care, bro. Love you too.
Love you too, buddy.
So, that's kind of where I'm starting off here with. Eli, go ahead.
No.
Okay, he's gone.
No, I'm right here. Basically, I like the starting point that you're starting at, because it helps me understand, like, oh shoot, you're right. Like, every time that the left moves center, then the right moves more right, and that means that the right gets more
moving along a ruler.
Right, and parts of the alt-right that may have at one point seemed fringe now are maybe more of a mainstream. Like QAnon, for example, is becoming more of a mainstream idea held by just mom and pop or whatever, versus where that would have kind of been a crazy, like it feels like 4 years ago it would have been like, oh yeah, sure, they're eating babies on Capitol Hill. Why? Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I noticed that with some of my members in one of my churches that happen to be leaders. Like, I was like, what on earth? I knew this person when I was growing up, and I distinctly remember them being very against this idea. But now, because it's mainstream Republican dogma, like, they're all in, and I'm like, whoa, they probably, like, it must have happened so gradually for them they don't notice it. But because I left and then came back like 20 years later, it's obvious to me, because I saw where they started.
Mm-hmm. It's black and white for you, but gray for them, perhaps.
So I say let's really, I don't know, I think it's worth talking about more, and I especially want to see Jesse get in on it and trigger Gabriel.
A while back.
Oh man.
Oh man.
So anyways, yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at. Is, I mean, there are a couple of ways that could help, I suppose, which would be, one, if we had maybe, adding more parties doesn't necessarily solve everything, but it could help to have a true left and a true right party that's, like, for example, I think to some extent the more extremist far right groups are a more honest version of what the Republican Party wants to really be. Because, I mean, if they're not afraid to say, we don't like other races being in our country, and it's just Americans all the way, white Americans, Italians are white Americans, by the way, and they want to have, nationalism and all that. I mean, that really is what a a truly conservative platform would be. And the Republican Party is kind of the diluted version of that. And then same goes for the Democratic Party, where, there's certainly socialists, true socialists, and they're not just when the Republicans go up and say that UBI or universal health care is a socialist policy, even though and will be a huge cost overrun, even though Social Security is one of the most efficiently run programs in the U.S. It would be helpful if everybody had their own party to represent them.
Yeah,
And
two-party system is evil.
Right. And probably part of that would be, changing the electoral college and stuff along those lines.
Yeah.
The other issue I think would be another big improvement would be if people realized on both sides that at least the center of the line people anyways could realize that it's not necessarily us versus them. It's really more of a class struggle where, both sides right now do have corrupt politicians who are really just interested in lining their own pockets. And, just because somebody runs on a left-leaning platform, I mean, they're altruistic. No, you're right, Carter, exactly.
Like, yeah, who is profiting from us at each other's throats,
If the guy with the lifted truck arguing about the Koch brothers with their uncle at Thanksgiving could get along with his brother who's in the big city and drives a Prius, who also realizes that, all these politicians are just trying to grease the special interest pockets and vice versa, then, there could be common ground there to at least get somebody who would be interested in representing, something that the people would actually want. Because people think that because they've been told to think that they want the wall. A lot of times that plays into standing bias and racism that they do have as well already. But if you ask people, 20 years ago, if we need a border wall with Mexico made out of cement with barbed wire on top and 24-hour patrols, they'd be like, no, that's a huge waste of money. Why would we do that? Well, because Donald Trump wants to pay his contractor friends to build a wall. So there's a number of issues
I didn't even
But he
consider
said he
that
was gonna
point.
pay
That
for
makes a
my-
lot of sense.
But he said he was going to pay for my college debt if I built the wall.
Oh, man.
Did you guys ever hear that one?
Actually, I did not hear that one myself, actually, but that's an interesting take.
One
I think pretty much everybody should. Oh, man. Here's the other thing, actually, that really got me really just kind of blown away is that Tucker Carlson took like one stand against Donald Trump, and all of a sudden there's a huge call to cancel him. And I'm like, this is Tucker Carlson. I mean, the man has literally been shilling since day one or before. As soon as he's like, the election's over, like calling it, Trump didn't win, whatever, people are like, and I forget if that was his actual take or what if that was even the issue. But I mean, as soon as he says one thing, it's like, oh, he's a traitor. He's basically a socialist. I'm like, oh my goodness.
He didn't read the script correctly.
So there's just, I'm not sure there is a way that realistically any one person or any one party could even go to fix the system overall.
It might.
We can definitely talk about that more later. It might just take the collapse of the American financial system and government, and then we split off. Texas becomes its own state. California becomes a true democracy. Everybody direct vote.
Yeah, you would
and
think a traumatic event. Oh, I don't know, like a huge plague or COVID would help unite us, but it's only further divided.
Well, that's because COVID is not a pandemic; it's a plandemic. Why? Just you wait. As soon as this election is over, there obviously
November 14, there won't be another news article.
Not another. Like, I'm serious. COVID has magically will be gone.
Well, yeah, here's the craziest thing is if you told all of these people who refused to wear masks that it was actually the government who had released it and they were trying to do population control. Bill Gates was doing population control. They'd be in masks because they're like, I ain't letting no damn liberal Bill Gates kill me off. It's them libs trying to kill me. I'm gonna wear this mask and you ain't gonna tell me to take it off, sir. I mean, it's just because it's a political issue now that people have refused to.
Something that's medical has become political. Let that sink in. It's just so sad.
Yeah,
And governors try to tell registered nurses how they should be doing their duties when they're the ones that went to med school, not them.
yeah, but here's actually kind of a hot take on that. That is a symptom of a bigger issue that we're having, especially in the sciences, where there's a general distrust of authority when it comes to basically any sort of consensus. Take vaccination for example, or statements on food and health, and the CDC, not the CDC, the is it the FDA? I forget who it is.
Is it dietary recommendations or something?
Yeah, dietary recommendations saying that like that it's okay to eat some kinds of bacon, you know, when you very clearly should not if you're having heart problems, and a lot of lobbying from the milk industry, like those kinds of things. All of those things have really created a climate of where people are like, I've got to do my own research. But these people who are going out to do their own research are a bunch of, I don't even want to say who they are, but you know who they are. And they did not pass science and biology and physics in high school with flying colors. They just happened to pass because they passed. So their idea of doing research is finding what they find on Instagram or Twitter and saying, see, this says that. Where everybody kind of has like the burden of proof on their shoulders. So America.
I mean, did you know that some of the components in water, in the tap water you drink, were used to create nuclear bombs?
Yeah.
Now, if that's not unhealthy, I don't know what is.
That's right. Millions of children die in this substance we call water every year.
Every year.
How can that possibly? And you want to put that in your body?
Save the children.
Save the children.
It's about the children.
Drain the oceans, pollute them with sulfuric acid.
We found a correlation that all the gays drink water, and now you want to drink it? I don't think so.
What? It must have estrogen in it, and clearly that must pass into the bloodstream. Only in
or Asheville. I guess that's the second Portland.
Well, anyways, so that's enough. That's enough, I guess, for now on that. I mean, I just kind of had I'd add a few ideas there that might be interesting. I think if we get Jesse in here, maybe if we could find somebody who did hold a counter viewpoint, that might be an interesting discussion to see. Why would they believe one thing? And I don't think there are a couple people I think in our chat who are more right leaning, anyways, even if they don't necessarily get their dicks hard for Trump. But I'd be interested to see, where that comes from.
Yeah, and that's something I've noticed, at least within our friend group, is that we haven't really talked about it much, which is fair. We don't want to just fight about it or
now that is how you lose friends.
Bring up hot topics, but at the same time, we're never going to understand each other if we never talk about what's bothering us, or what's dividing us, So, I don't know.
Well, anyways, yeah. Well, go ahead and finish your thought, Carter. I thought you were...
Oh, no, I was done. I was done. I guess my point is I wish everyone was on this podcast, and then that would make it a more well-rounded one. That way we're not just in an echo chamber,
I mean, I could just sit here and tell you guys about how much, Andrew Yang and blah, blah, blah.
Yang.
Forget about student loans, whatever, but I don't think we're going to have not a terribly divisive discussion anyways about pros and cons on that, other from like maybe more of a theoretical, it could be better or, this and that kind of a thing, but I don't think there's anybody who really passionately believes that, so it's going to be difficult to get a varied opinion here, I think. Varied sentiment.
Yeah, when I was getting ready for the the homosexual versus pedophile debate in the Bible, I was really looking forward to like trying to play both sides of the field. But by the time I was finished with it, I was like, shoot, this is pretty.
There is the other side.
This is pretty cut and dry here. I don't know how I honestly like still don't know how to feel about this finding. Like maybe I'm still I'm open to the interpretation that I might very much be missing something. Something I didn't mention earlier was that the how is that pronounced? The zakar, which refers to a male boy or a young man, only occurs 82 times in the Bible, whereas the word for man, the ish, occurs over 2,000 times. So the zakar is a very specific word that gets used for this, and to like misconstrue this into talking about homosexuality, like you're kind of playing with a very specific word here. So I don't know. It's
hard.
Sickening.
I think it takes time to like have that sink in, because that really changes your worldview.
I mean, I was ready to throw down and say like, "Hey, you gay, you going to hell." But
You gotta have a foot to stand on, even if you're memeing.
yeah, like I gotta. I don't know. It's maybe like if being like I'm not even convinced. Like before I wasn't even convinced that being attracted to somebody with the same genitals as you was a sin. I was like pretty sure that having coitus or experiencing coitus with them was probably a sin. So, I was kind of like a modified celibacy camp, but I was like, probably having an affection or attraction towards somebody isn't bad. Like, it doesn't seem like it might be wrong.
I can understand that.
That's where I started.
You can appreciate another person's beauty no matter what gender they are.
Or
if they're handsome, they're handsome.
Attracted to someone. So that's where I was starting off at. I was not expecting to just suddenly hit a brick wall of evidence here that I'm looking at. And I'm like, dude, I'm like, oh man, these verses don't mean what I thought.
You have to go deeper, man. It's all a conspiracy.
So I think it's important to note as we sign off tonight that like this isn't the end of the road. I could be missing some pretty big chunks, and maybe I am, that end up convincing us and saying like, turns out the gay is bad. It's bad to be the gay. So but as far as I can tell right now, as far as God has led me in my brief Bible studies, that doesn't seem to be the case.
Amen.
If anything, it sounds like something that is not implicitly said correctly that is bad or a sin, but it might be just a guideline that the Bible suggests. But it's not necessarily a sin. But I don't know. Maybe that's my heretical take for the day, is that homosexuality is abstaining from it is a guideline more than it's a sin. That's what, if we're gonna follow along with the evidence.
Heterosexuality is the recommended playthrough, but not canon, not necessarily canon.
Yeah,
go through the game once with the default settings, and then add some difficulty the next time around. Maybe spawn in as black or transgender, and
or both
for New Game Plus. Ooh.
Too soon.
All right.
Anyway, guys, thanks for joining me. This has been another one of our fun talks. We'll come up with a proper name for the podcast eventually, but for now, these are kind of our different heretical takes.
Heretical hot takes. Yeah, we still have like so many more topics to cover. I swear.
For sure. Like, and
I feel like
we
we could easily revisit everything.